Welcome to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. Join us as we dive into the critical conversations shaping the future of coal. From industry experts to policymakers, we're exploring coal's essential role in America's energy, economy, and global trade. Whether it's powering communities, driving innovation, or securing strong global economies, coal is at the heart of it all. ACC, proud to be American, proud to be coal. Coal Nation starts now.
Welcome to Coal Nation, the podcast where we talk about coal and everything related to it. I'm so excited today to have Matt McKean with Frontieras North America with us because he's going down a path we haven't seen in a long time in coal, something new and exciting, and I can't wait to talk to Matt. Welcome to Coal Nation.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Matt, I first want to just kind of introduce you to the audience and the path that you took to get to coal and what you're doing today. And then we'll get into talking about Frontieras North America and what you guys are up to. But let's talk about how you got here and why you're bullish on coal.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Well, my background, I was a science major in college. I ended up going into finance, but I came from an entrepreneurial family. I had 3 years of college chemistry. And so I knew a little bit about coal. First year general chemistry in university, they teach you about coal conversion, Fischer-Tropsch, kind of the early beginnings of other things you could do with coal. I had a career in real estate finance for many years. I Sunrise and CEO of a company I built that was very successful. And after the financial crisis, I looked around in 2009, 2010 and started asking a lot of questions about first principles thinking and why was everyone wrong and how quickly wealth evaporated from people around me. And so I decided to go into a different space. I'd been part of a large CEO mentoring organization, was exposed to a lot of different industries, and I decided energy was something I wanted to do. Came from an entrepreneurial family. My grandfather was an inventor, as pilot license signed by Orville Wright. And so, so had a couple of planes in the Smithsonian archives. And so, I'd kind of seen innovation and I'll tell you the rest of the story, but I met Joe Witherspoon. So we are not a new company. We launched the company in 2011. And so we spent several years developing our patent portfolio all over the world and then readying the technology for commercialization.
So it's probably better to say you're not a new company, but you recently really became spotlighted in the coal industry.
Well, we kept our head down for a long time. We didn't get our U.S. patent until 2018. It was a 7-year journey to that point. And, I guess I was maybe naive enough to think it was a good idea to launch a coal technologies company during the Obama administration. And so I've been pretty outspoken about my background and the way I kind of see the world and help kind of guide the company. And needless to say, we started to commercialize really in 2021, and then we faced, ran head first into the ESG movement, which was, of course, anti-coal, anti-fossil fuel, anti-industrial progress, if you will. So, so here we are today. Much better place for us.
Well, we have lots to talk about. And so let's talk about kind of the exciting news this spring for you. You guys broke ground in West Virginia on a facility that you're building out there. Let's talk about kind of the steps to get there, because the first time I saw you speak was in West Virginia at their annual meeting in August last year. And then, and tell us about that, what you guys were doing and where you're going. But then you had this big event this spring. So talk about how this process, how fun it is to be where you're at today.
Yeah, it's so that was at the Greenbrier, right?
Yeah,
in August of 2025. And so, obviously we have a lot of close ties to West Virginia. That's where we're commercializing. We know the West Virginia Coal Association really well. They'd asked actually the year before if we'd be interested, and we're like, we're kind of keeping our head down, right now. We don't want to be the tallest dandelion and have our head knocked off. And the last administration was not friendly to coal, as that would be an understatement. And so we had property under option for a few years that we did significant due diligence on in West Virginia. And we green lighted that in 2025 that we were going to move ahead past all of our engineering due diligence. And so we closed on that land in early January and had a ceremonial groundbreaking ceremony. I think it was August 2nd. So we had the governor and U.S. senator and members of government and a lot of advocates of the company there. So it was a demonstrably positive event for us to commercialize the technology in West Virginia using Appalachia coal.
It's exciting for the region, the prosperity that you're going to be able to bring and the jobs and the opportunities. It's definitely exciting for a region that has been demonized for so long. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah. It's such a great industry. You asked, why I was, positive about coal. I mean, the United States is often referred to in our sector as, the Saudi Arabia of coal, right? We have the most abundant coal resources in the world, and our technology is a way to potentially redefine the entire sector of coal utilization because we use modern refining and gas processing methods in our technology, which exploits the intrinsic properties of coal. So we can liberate different fuels and chemicals and properties from coal into products in a way that's never been done before. So a lot of people, they confuse us with coal to liquids or coal gasification, syngas. We're not those things at all, which is why we have very elaborate patent portfolio with a lot of claims that's been accepted.
Well, I'm glad you started down the technical piece because that was where I was going to go next because we've talked about kind of where you're at and what's going on. And you're not a coal to liquids. In fact, want to be very clear, you're not coal to liquids. But can you talk a little bit more in detail what separates you from and what that portfolio is going to look like in the future?
Yes. Well, coal to liquids technology, it works. I was a German scientist in the 1930s that won the Nobel Prize for coal conversion technology chemistry. And essentially what coal to liquids does is you take your coal and you use a lot of energy to convert it into synthetic crude oil. And so then that synthetic crude oil must take a lot of energy from somewhere else to then refine it into different products. It works, worked during the Nazi war machine in World War II because Germany had really no domestic oil reserves. So they took this science and they used it to build 25 synthetic crude plants using their own lignite. The only other places it's really ever been commercialized is in South Africa during apartheid. South Africa had a difficult time politically transacting and procuring crude from trading partners. So they resorted to Fischer-Tropsch, a company called Sasol, still does that today. They have an infrastructure around that. And then the Chinese have done gasification, syngas, which is just another way of, cooking your coal into something else, But what it does is at the end of the day is you're left with trying to compete with crude oil being pumped right out of the ground. And that's pretty tough to do when you have, a grasshopper, nodding donkey all day long, pumping crude right out of the ground. When now you've got to mine coal, you've got to ship the coal, convert the coal into crude. Now that's your starting point. So it's very hard to compete economically. But our technology is different because we don't do that. We essentially in the same way, Rockefeller's Standard Oil figured out how to effectively thermally crack crude oil into multiple different products with high degree of precision. That's what our technology does. So it's designed to take every molecule within coal, and every molecule that comes in leaves as a molecule of a different product when it leaves the plant. So large volumes of diesel fuel, jet fuel, naphtha, chemical grade naphtha, and then the solid product ends up becoming a coke, a metallurgical coke product, not a metallurgical coal, but a metallurgical coke. And then the would-be waste products, we end up making large volumes of industrial chemicals, sulfuric acid, and then using part of that through our, co-founder Joe Witherspoon's technology to make ammonium sulfate fertilizer using the Witherspoon method, named after Joe. So our technology takes coal and it really moves it into 3 different industries, energy, agriculture, and industrial. Yeah, with no pollution and a very, very minor economic or environmental imprint at all. Really, just the emissions that come from coal and external fired heaters, just like any industrial plant would have.
Sure. And I think that's what's interesting to me is you have very little emissions. I mean, I'm always asked, well, talk about clean coal. What does clean coal mean? And I try to explain that when we're talking about utilities, that we've bolted on all these emission controls. And so what you're really seeing come out of the stacks now is a water vapor and has very, very little particulates with them. We're capturing the sulfur and the mercury and the nitrogen. Uh, Talk about how yours is working and why we can say it's low emissions and it's clean.
Yeah, that's very well said, Emily. Modern coal plants in the United States, it's really just kind of it's almost it's largely propaganda. If anyone goes to our websites and reads the last couple thought pieces I did, where I talk about how the coal industry was targeted,
Mhm.
Chinese strategy, which basically was implemented asymmetrical warfare to fund NGOs in the United States to attack our cheap, plentiful, reliable source of electricity, which is coal plants. Then I think it'll resonate with your audience, and I recommend that's in the news section of our website under insights. But yeah, so we don't combust coal. So our technology, we don't burn the coal, so we don't produce any ash or coal combustion residuals. Our process subjects coal, the feedstock, to heat and pressure in an oxygen-free environment, but we move it through a moving bed and we distillate out, vaporize out the different product streams as we go through the process. So it's very similar to crude refining. And a lot of people ask, how come no one else ever figured this out? And it would take me a little while to tell you why. But my co-founder, Joe Witherspoon, he's a process design expert, engineer, chemical engineer in the refining space. And so his last 25, 30 years of designing processes at the crude refining and the natural gas, he's crossed over the fence into the gas world, is really what led to his innovation around our technology, as no one really had ever thought to do this before. You get people asking, how come Chevron didn't figure this out? And well, because Chevron's in the crude business, right?
You need to.
They move crude oil, and there's a lot of it out there. It turns out, there's 120 million barrels of crude a day in the world pumped, and so we get to benefit from that whole infrastructure, the logistics, the commodities market, the pricing structure benefits us. And then, the natural gas world doesn't have anything to do with the oil world. They call it oil and gas, but it's really oil is one side of the conference. Natural gas is at the other side of the conference. And coal's not at the conference. So,
Yeah.
there's the coal producers are, gosh, these outstanding companies with great engineering and, adherence to strict state safety guidelines. And they're very good at identifying coal reserves and commissioning mines and producing coal over a long period of time. But their job isn't to take the coal apart with technologies and other things. It's to get their coal to the buyers of their product. So so we don't combust. Our fixed carbon fast coke will be used for a few different things. One, it'll be used in steel manufacturing as for blast furnaces
Okay.
and in injection carbon. And then the second thing is it can be used for other industrial blast furnaces or cement kilns. Very, very favorable for that. And then it will actually be inserted and act as a coal replacement fuel, meaning a coal plant we could co-locate in front of this. Mason County is a greenfield site. It was farmland, but a lot of our future expansion is going to be located on or right near an existing coal-fired power plant where we can intercept the coal feed, extract the products inherent in the coal, and then deliver them a coke product, which burns as clean as natural gas with almost no sulfur emissions because we remove almost all the sulfur. So it is a big upgrade, and it will perpetuate and grow coal utilization while likely reducing coal combustion. Because once you convert it from coal to coke, it's no longer coal per se anymore. But yeah.
Well, and I was just in Ohio at Ohio University at a innovations in technology conference. And so the things that people are coming up with, they might not be in the scale of coal usage as yours, like highly, very, very neat stuff they're doing. There's the bricks and the deck boards and what we're doing in the aerospace industry, but smaller, we'll say high profit uses. But what you're talking about is using coal in a very large quantities. And that's what's really great for the industry is you're going to use coal when we're talking about tons in millions of tons, not thousands of tons.
That's correct. So our Mason County project on the Ohio River in West Virginia will end up being 15,000 tons of coal per day, approaching 6 million tons a year. Phase one will process 7,500 tons of coal per day, which is like a unit train every other day. If anyone's been stopped in the country behind a train, coal, at the railroad crossing, well, goes by forever. It seems like that. That's large volume of coal. And our technology was designed as a commercial process. So it was from the beginning, it was never going to be anything but a large scale process. It was designed using available equipment and commercial processes available to us.
Well, and the other off stream that you've got is the helping the agricultural community, certainly living in Wyoming. And a couple of things that I'm thinking about. I mean, one, you're making ammonia for fertilizer for agriculture, but can that also be used in emulsions? So like out here in Wyoming, we have large, the way they get to the coal is they use emulsion to blast the overburden out of the way. Will it be able to be used in that process also?
That's not something that we've looked at doing. The different feedstocks determine the product volumes and the product mix that we get from that. And so one of the things that we get from Appalachia coal that we don't get from PRB coal is sulfur. Because, PRB is pretty low sulfur. And so we need that sulfur if we're going to make sulfuric acid and ammonium sulfate fertilizer. There's some other feedstocks we may be able to co-feed, which I won't get into to do that. But, our technology takes a lot of resources and strategies and techs from refining. So emulsion, that's not something we've really discussed. It's
I was just curious when we talk about it because that's something certainly that's needed in the industry, and I thought, well, maybe there's a link there.
Yeah, I'm big on, I grew up in the agriculture world, so I grew up in Eastern Washington, so apple country, and so
Apple country.
we had apples and cherries, and relatives on the other side of the mountain had pears and hops and everything. So anything I can do to support agriculture, I will. The farm we're building on was a soybean farm, and we let the guy farm while we were under option control agreements and everything. Just support farming. As long as it's fun because we'll end up turning what was farmland into a fertilizer producer, which will benefit a lot of other farms.
Yeah, we're all natural resources, right? And so being able
That's
to
right.
support one another is important.
That's right.
I want to give you a moment to talk about your team because I've got to spend time with Andrea, but you have a pretty fantastic team and just want to give you the opportunity to give a shout out to them and what they're doing to help you guys get started and where you're going.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I co-founded the company with Joe Witherspoon. Joe is the science mind of the company. I try to keep up in terms of knowing how to explain it and describe the technology to the marketplace in a way that's meaningful, that helps the investment world and capital world know what we're doing. So Joe's background is chemical engineer, graduated from the University of Utah, and co-founder of the company. Just looks at the world very differently. And there's a lot of engineers out there, but not every engineer is a technologist. As a matter of fact, I'd say most are not, so difficult engineering work. And usually, someone gets out of chemical engineering school and goes into kind of one thing and they stay in that field, for their career, and they do good work in that. But Joe's kind of one of those boring, mad scientist, if you will, that knows how to, keep his mind constantly engaged and is always looking for new ideas and new ways to do things. And so inevitably he had to, create his own company, because it's hard to do that inside of very, very large companies and engineering firms that just want to do things the same way it's always been done and just don't change it at all. And, we don't need better. It just works.
Yep.
And
Let's have a cookie cutter and just,
let's all take a long lunch and just do it the way, the way it's supposed to be done. And so, yeah, it's been a joy, and one of the more rewarding parts of my life working with Joe and building the company. Andrea is our chief commercial officer. So I met Andrea back about 9 years ago. She was in structured finance, had a private equity firm she partnered and created that funded energy projects. And so we got to know each other way back then. She ended up scuttling that firm during COVID with her partners, and I ended up recruiting her to the company in early 2022. So she's like 4.5 years with us, but was always kind of been keenly aware of what we were doing and how we were advancing. And so that was a good score for us. We've got a gentleman, Doug Ramey, is our senior VP of corporate affairs. Doug was a board member with us for a decade. He went to Harvard Business School, undergrad in accounting, a lot of experience in real estate development with Trammell Crow. My background was in real estate finance, and so I'm used to finance and financing projects, real estate, and entrepreneurialism. We hired our CFO, Jose Lopez. We hired about a year ago. We used an executive search to find a CFO that could take us public, and very strong background. He was at Baker Hughes for a decade, with PwC for a decade, and so worked at The Hague, very accredited as an energy, as an energy CFO. So we've got a few other team members, but it's moving rapidly. We hired a VP of communications that we brought on. We recently hired a director of AI integration, in that we're actually using quite a bit of AI in the company now. And so we have an initiative we'll be launching soon called Frontieras 3D AI, which stands for Design, Develop, and Defend. And so understanding AI and where it's going. And part of what we do as a company will help provide the electrons for the data centers that are needed. You've got the huge energy draw. And so it's funny to me how quick, we predicted this years in advance. We put out a video in 2022 called High Tech from Hydrocarbon. And we're basically trying to tell everybody, I felt like a dog barking at the moon. You need to be aware of what's coming. We're going to need a lot of energy. Do you people understand this? And so now that, the tech world suddenly just doesn't really care about where the energy comes from anymore,
Yeah, we just need it.
They don't care if it's green or pink or, blue or whatever it is anymore. It's just, please get us enough for our data centers. So, the irony. Yeah.
I absolutely support that. Oh, the irony.
Yeah.
You talked your team is outstanding. And obviously
Thank
that's
you.
one of the reasons you guys are hitting the ground so hard and running and you're just everywhere at the moment. But I want to go back to, you have a couple blogs out, and we alluded to some things that probably not the best time to launch a company in coal during the Biden administration, and ESG and some different things. This industry has been hit really hard, but you're a pretty vocal supporter of the industry, and even your comment about China before. This has been a concerted effort to end the coal industry, and wrongfully so. There's so many misconceptions, and that's one of the things here at the ACC we're really trying to do, is get information out there. It never fails that when I'm talking, and I'll give you an example, and then I'll let you pontificate into your feelings. But I was at a conference in Washington, D.C., and we were talking about coal, and it was in front of individuals going out to different country embassies. And we talked about coal and what it's used for, and where we're at in the marketplace today. And as I sat back down, I had never myself even really thought about this, but the lady I was sitting by, she goes, "So what you're telling me is there's coal in my water bottle, my stainless steel Stanley water bottle." I'm like, yeah, there is coal there. I mean, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is, we here at the ACC, we're really trying hard to put out just little clips about how coal's in our lives, our daily lives. Like you find it everywhere and everything. And that's what people are missing is that link of why this is so important. And so with that setup, I'm going to just let you have a moment to talk about what you've seen and why it's so important that coal stays.
Well, there's a saying in mining, that if it can't be grown, it must be mined.
Yes.
And so, people don't think that way. We don't really teach infrastructure and industry really to kids anymore when they're growing up. They assume things. So, the average person, if you ask them, where's our energy come from? They go, from that white plate on the wall right there. That's where it comes from. Like where does that come from? Where's that? From the lines that come to the house? They don't have any idea what power generation is. And so, when we founded RIB Holding Company years ago, I'd looked out at energy very differently. I got my undergrad in human nutritional science, minor in chemistry. I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. And, so to me, I looked at energy and it was the biggest industry in the world, several times larger than the packaged food industry. And then, from a biological basis, human performance, food really is energy, right? If you think about it
Yep.
for humans and animals, unless it's Cheetos, or vodka or stuff like that, you know what I mean? But that's more entertainment. But real food is biological energy. And so, electrons and diesel fuel and stuff like that, that's machine fuel. That's machine food. It feeds the machines. And so many, many years ago, I kind of looked at the US and just using first principles thinking and realized, we, as a country, we'd already lost the cheap labor battle, right? So our products started being manufactured overseas because there was cheap labor. And so the thought was, okay, well, fortunately, we have the world's cheapest power, the cheapest energy. And so if we lose the cheap energy battle, then nothing will be ever made here again because, we won't be able to compete. And then that took me down a road of thinking about the future of manufacturing. And one of the most recent blogs I did was on robotics. And so I'm like, wait a second, if China is manufacturing everything now, or a lot of it, what happens when manufacturing moves to robotics? Well, as long as our energy cost is cheap, if we have the same robots that can make the same product as they do, well, then we're in an advantage because they still have to ship the products all the way across the world in shipping containers. Whereas we could make the product, in Missouri and ship it one state over, we're going to be able to compete. And so I think we have Chinese patents, we know the Chinese, but they're very shrewd and they think very long term. And so they run really asymmetrical warfare against the United States and our coal industry to try to get us, I believe, to disarm and disable our coal fleet. And it almost worked. It almost did. We still got a couple hundred coal plants left in the fleet, but I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I gave public comments many years ago when they were talking about tearing down Navajo Generating Station. It was this beautiful 2.25 gigawatt coal plant, the only plant commissioned by Congress in the United States. Central Arizona project, which pumps all the water of the state, had to buy its power from it, and it was represented like 30% of the revenue of the Navajo Nation and like 90% of the revenue to the Hopi, tribes.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
well, surely they're not really going to tear this down, right? And so, somehow the green agenda got to the tribal members, and they literally, it'd be like killing the golden goose. We're gonna kill our golden goose, and now the state lacks enough power for what's being developed. Taiwan semiconductors, the nuke plant Palo Verde can only go so far, and there's a lot of talk about nuclear as another solution. Nuclear is extremely expensive, and a very high operating cost to run it on large scale. And so coal is, It is a gift to the United States. We have the most coal reserves of anyone in the world, any nation in the world. And the modern coal fleet's like 99% cleaner than they were in the early 70s before all the emissions requirements. So I tell people, you think coal is dirty. It's because you imagine some guy in overalls with a shovel, with coal soot on his face. And you have no idea, because if you went to a modern coal plant, you could put a kindergarten playground at the base of the stack and they wouldn't even know they were next to a coal plant.
Well, I'm 3 miles from a coal plant, and I can tell you it's really, really clean. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel so lucky to be able to look out every day, and honestly, living here in Wyoming, being able to see that coal plant and knowing that it's producing energy that's affordable and reliable, because even though this winter wasn't that cold in Wyoming, I mean, it's not uncommon to have 30 below days, and it's
Yeah.
nice to know you've got power.
That's right. That's right. It's essential. I
It's
mean,
essential.
it's a modern society we have.
Yeah. I was always amazed, we as industry knew what we had, and, went to work every day proud of what we did. But I was always amazed at the timelines that were put out there, because they were unachievable. Even if all things lined up, they were just unachievable. And I'd had a conversation several years ago, under the previous administration at DOE. And I said, okay, knowing what we know today, knowing that the supply chains, it was post COVID, the supply chains were broke. And we're talking just mineral supply chains. How do we build our solar and our wind, and even be able to build transmission lines? And those supply chains are still to this day strained. And I looked at this individual and I said, so knowing everything you know today, and everything is constrained, why are we still pushing to close our coal plants by 2028 and 2030 and 2040? And he's like, well, that's just the way it is. And that was disheartening, because it's like, you just told me that we have a crisis and that we have a problem, but yet you're not willing to open the door to have those conversations again.
Yeah, it's a lack of leadership, state levels all the way up to federal. And so, but it's more sinister than that. I mean, it's way more sinister than that. I believe I was very outspoken against ESG, called it, I would jokingly refer to it on LinkedIn as the evil socialist Gestapo, and I think it was very Marxist in terms of a design from the top down, where we're going to use politics to go in and tell businesses how they're allowed to run, who they have to hire. And if they don't do exactly what we say they're going to do, we're going to cut them off from capital. And very difficult to the coal industry, because the banking world basically quit lending to them, made it very difficult. When a president, like President Joe Biden came in, and then the first thing he did was cancel the Keystone Pipeline. Any CEO that embarks on a slightly difficult commercial project, which has perceived environmental overtones, they can get fired if it doesn't work, because they're going to put billions of dollars at risk potentially and have it just get keystone by a stroke of a pen. And so, one of the things I look at is, I wrote a piece called the Disney Paradox. And you can see that on there, where I, reference that this is the 70-year anniversary of Disneyland in Anaheim, California. And 70 years ago, Walt Disney, when he finally found the location for Disneyland, they identified it, they planned it, then they began construction and opened Disneyland 1 year and 1 day after they started. And so I asked people, I'm like, do you think that could get done today? And they're like, no. I'm like, why? Did we forget how to build things? Do we not have any communication, abilities anymore? And it's like, it's all politics. And so you've just got attorneys and an unwinding of industrial progress in the country. And so, yeah, it's much more sinister than people just thinking coal was dirty. I believe it was, in that article on the stratagem the Chinese used, and from how they did it and who they funded. And I mean, even, the Sierra Club, which, there'll never be any love lost between me and the Sierra Club. My grandfather had a ranch in Ojai, California when I was a kid, when the $6 million Man was on television. He was right next to Lee Major's ranch. And so he worked for one of the big utilities in California. And the Sierra Club came in and got their whole area designated as a bird preserve and forced them to sell out under eminent domain. And so, I was just, was like, how does that happen? Grant is gonna
A
just
long
got to sell
history.
the ranch. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it goes way back with me, and you look at during the Obama administration. I talk about one of the articles that natural gas company, name who they are on this. You can read the article. Paid the Sierra Club, millions and millions of dollars to create the Beyond Coal campaign. So
Yes.
imagine that, natural gas companies paying an environmental group to attack another industry that if that goes away, makes your product way more valuable. So it's just time we got back to, I call us sometimes we got to think of ourselves as industrial restorationists. We got to get back to real industry and benefit from the resources that we have.
Well, one, we love our lifestyles here. I mean, as Americans, we love that we have power and we're able to do just about anything we want.
That's right.
And that's a good thing. I think your background and my background line up pretty well. I was raised on a cattle ranch in northern Montana, and then went into mining, starting out in metals, and then came over to coal. But you made the comment, and I think this is the one thing that I'd like to just explore a little bit with you is natural resources need to find the common ground together, and have a good story that says, look, we're needed in our lives, and not lives that we enjoy, because there can be an agenda. And if something works, like the Beyond Coal campaign, it wasn't that long after that was launched, and that company went back to the Sierra Club. It's documented, went back and said, hey, here's some more money, we want you to continue the campaign. And it went from Beyond Coal to beyond fossil fuels. Like, it's well documented that their priority shifted, and part of that was because, look, we've done a pretty good job of beyond coal. Now let's go make it even bigger. And I've always warned other industries. I'm like, if you don't think they're coming after you at some point, they are. And
That's
so
right.
let's join together and have this conversation about how important our natural resources are in this country, and educate and advocate that we are needed.
That's right. And that's why, states like Wyoming, West Virginia, Texas, they can be, Oklahoma, they can be the new vision of leadership in the country because they understand resources. They've been kind of overlooked, by other states for a long time. And so, working, with the governor of West Virginia, Governor Patrick Morrisey, I had a lot of respect for him because he was the AG and he sued the EPA in the Supreme Court and won. It was little West Virginia there suing the EPA for the EPA trying to go outside the fence of power plants and put broad mandates. And we've never wavered on that. There's not a single piece of any documentation in any of our corporate literature over the last ever that says, we supported decarbonization or we believed in reducing CO2, or my co-founder, we would laugh about it, imagine that you would need less CO2, it's plant food,
It's actually part of life. You need it.
that's where the plants get their carbon from the air. It's not going through the ground up the vine, the carbon to grow the new leaves. It's coming out of the air. And so we just found it just preposterous that this kind of thinking made its way. And, you just kind of follow the money and people will do any interesting things for pieces of paper with pictures of dead presidents on them,
Well, I think what's incredible about this industry, and it's not always well shared, because we get the spotlight when there's a crisis, unfortunately. But the fact is, every day in the supply chain, people are going to work, they're doing a great job. They want to be good stewards, good environmentalists. They enjoy using the land just as much as anybody else. When you look at safety records, especially in the mining industry, I mean, highly, highly aware of the safety in the industry, as well as our utilities. And, it is an industry that is safe. And finally, when we are talking about governance, our ESG, our governance, we did what was right. We, followed the rules and different things. But this industry is very proud of what they do, and they do it well. And I think we need to celebrate that more. And really happy that you're part of the industry and your views of it. But talk about maybe as we start to close up and think about closing statements, just talk about how you're just really proud to be part of this industry and what it means to you.
Well, I call it real work. There's things that have to be done by real workers. It's one thing to put on a tie, but unless you have the support structure of industry, and people that are willing to get their hands dirty, it's very hot where I live, so it's 110, degrees in the middle of the summer, sometimes 115. I'll go by and see guys, laying asphalt, on a road, and I'm like, thank you,
Right.
thank you so much for your service, right, to the country, because you've got to have that, and people don't understand. If you pull industry, if you've got an aging workforce in the power industry, and we need to give proper respect to those people that are willing to do hard jobs and that enjoy doing that kind of work and find fulfillment in it, and not demonize them or tell them there's something wrong with them, or that they're abusing the land. A lot of people in that industry, they're absolute environmentalists. They believe in taking care of the land, and coal does a great job of that. I mean, you look at reclaimed coal, how much different they look. You can see that in Texas. You go through parts of Texas, you're like, why are there rolling green hills right there? Well, those are because that was reclaimed coal. And so you're like, that would never be there normally, but it's I think overall, it kind of feeds into people's worldview. Our and maybe I'm a little out of place talking about that. So if you want to edit this, you can. But I think our values as a country, were founded based upon man being unique and being created and endowed by our creator. It's in our formation documents of the country, all men being equal. And the ability to use the land, to be stewards of the land, you use that word, it's a great word, and to prosper from using raw materials and resources of the land to make a better life and make people's lives more abundantly happy or survive. That's part of who we are. And so to turn around and give up to Marxist or Malthusian ideology, which, teaches that it's scarce and, you're no more important than, a groundhog as a person. You're just another organism. And how dare you take away their, their habitat and things like that. So it flows really into who we are as a country, the soul of the nation. And are we really willing to support industries like the coal industry? Because if it wasn't there, things would get very, very bad. And
Yes.
Secretary Wright just talks about that. The eastern, the winter, the freezes that hit, it was close. Had you not had coal fired generation, you'd had hundreds of deaths that would have occurred.
Yeah. More than what there were.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, I want to ask you anything we haven't talked about today that you want to leave the audience with.
No, I'd say just pay attention to us. We're doing big things. Our company offers a lot of economic progress in this space. I think we're going to, as a company with our technology, we're going to expand coal production, because we'll build a case for commissioning mines, whereas maybe that's tentative. Where the current industry can be tentative. They're concerned with a change in administration, maybe getting keystoned. So, I think we are a redefinition of the future of coal utilization. It's a broad, big statement, but I say that with humility, out of respect to everyone that's come before us in this industry and built us to where we're at right now.
I love that. I look forward to, because I know it's on your calendar, meeting you in person in Park City at the Coal Innovations Conference that we've got in August. Look forward to having you come and speak at that conference and meeting you in person and hearing more about just the incredible work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I look forward to that. That'll be great. Thank you for your work that you do. American Coal Council. Watched all of your work for many years, and the industry is lucky to have you.
We appreciate that, Matt, and thank you so much for being on Coal Nation podcast today. It was a pleasure.
It was. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for tuning in to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. Our mission is to share coal's story and showcase its critical role in powering our economy and supporting our way of life. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe. The American Coal Council represents members across the entire coal supply chain and advocates tirelessly for our vital industry. There is strength in numbers, and we'd love for you to be part of the conversation. By joining ACC, you gain exclusive access to the latest industry developments, a voice in our work that can benefit your business, and incredible networking opportunities. To learn more, visit www.americancoalcouncil.org. Together, we are shaping the future of coal, and it's exciting. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.